deeper into, I would say this decade, I think we've all become a little bit more conscious of our diversity in our communities, the representation of different ethnicities throughout the country that's been underrepresented. I think COVID also has shed a light on our health disparities. And there's a lot of things that we can address, probably not within this short period of time, but we want to give voice to those who are voiceless. There's a lot of people out there that have been suffering in different ways, whether it's psychologically or physically during this pandemic. And I believe that life has given us an opportunity to talk about this because we're all part of the human family and we need to respect each other as so. So what I'm going to do, I am going to ask, just some questions, certain individuals. And as I ask these questions, I want them to first introduce themselves, give a little bit about their background. You can go out on the site and see a little bit more about their bio, but I'll let them to tell you their story themselves. And then we're going to get deeper into this discussion. And I'm going to start with Alexis. He probably already knew that because Alexis almost didn't join us. He was called away for jury duty in West Palm Beach. We're assuming that he did not have to serve. He told me he was good. So I think he went ahead and made a call and said, no, you can go ahead. This is a very important. We're going to acknowledge that you came and that you had the opportunity to go ahead and serve on this panel. So with that said, Dr. Alexis, I should say, Dr. Alexis, Mr. Perdereau.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks for having me and thanks for the opportunity to speak. Yes, I did have jury duty today, but fortunately or unfortunately was postponed. My service was not required in that sense. So I am thankful for the opportunity to be able to serve. Alexis Perdereau, recent grad, completed my dissertation. Primary focus is on healthcare, have a research interest in genetics, healthcare, and the process around disclosure related to medical records and privacy in general. So it's not shipping about me.
No, well, let's get to your question because I know this is dear to your heart.
Sure.
And it's around mentorship. How do you think mentorship has impacted or can improve diversity in healthcare and lead to better outcomes?
I think mentorship is important, right? Because it provides the opportunity for us to look at individuals who've done it before, individuals that have specific experience within that healthcare space, who could be a guide, right? The majority of the individual who's in the space today, somebody have helped you along the way. And mentorship is one of those direct investment that an individual who's passed through the system have an opportunity to reach back and help. And by providing that initial guidance and assistance for users having an interest, whether there is someone with experience or without experience. Mentorship has been successful in the approach as it relates to those individuals because we've seen the benefits of it. I have had the fortunate of having a great mentor. When I worked at Broward Health back, Fernando Martinez was one of the mentors that I look up to. He exemplified that level of leadership and had that interest within this space to be able to reach back and look at individuals who successfully contributing within healthcare. So his approach was to look at bringing in nurses into the informatic systems so that they can see their experience having had that one-to-one relationship with the patient and understanding the clinical system. So that pairing, for example, was successful because you have somebody who's already within the space working with patient and just working on the other ends, right? So they're better able to make decisions because they have an overall better understanding of the whole patient care and the importance of that delivery. I think Judy spoke about it in the previous session where we talk about the whole idea of having the patient a part of that process and being able to reach back into those non-traditional informatics area, even those individuals to add value to that patient care and be able to work on better outcome.
Man, wonderful answer. I want to get some input from Regine. What do you think about that? And before you answer, just give us a little bit of your background.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Rene Bonneau. I'm CEO and founder of RB Advisory, and we focus on compliance and cyber risk management. I started my journey at Curiosity at the age of 12 into technology, and that allowed me to actually flourish, right? And especially, Dr. Alexis mentioned about mentorship. That was a very key component because, again, being from Haiti, right? In junior high school, a young lady being the only one in the class, my professors, my teachers actually provided that outlook, right? That I can do it, I can continue on and move forward and provide what that next step would be for me in that sense. So, and continue on to where I am today. Mentorship played a big role. I will always say Alexis is a big mentor. He knows that because I'll call him at 2:00 in the morning, right? But it's because the insights you get, not only mentors from those that come before you, but those that works alongside of you as well, right? Those are very key to moving forward, to understanding who you are, what you do, and what the next steps that you'll need to take. And that's that peer engagement, we can call it that. That's a very big and high influence. So that's my take on that as well.
Man, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Because without people leading the way and actually turning around and helping the next person up, how do you get to that next level? If you're in a, working for a large institution, you make it be in a AVP role. We heard Chris and Edvard talk about that. They were in a position to make change. And then they have the ultimate opportunity to create cultural change. And I like to see that happen. Now, I see Dr. Adewami Aarwani, and I want him to talk about his experience, because this is something that we don't see a lot in our society, that when you go to see a physician or a clinician, being an African-American man, I don't usually see a person of my own ethnic background. But Dr. Adewami is a neurological surgeon. So I'd like you to talk about your experience, just a little bit of your bio, and kind of how to talk about your mentors in your world.
So thank you, Grant. Thank you guys for having me. I hope you can hear me okay. I know I talk kind of low. Just a quick background. I went to medical school in Augusta, Georgia, Med College of Georgia. Did my residency training in California at Loma Linda. It's in Southern California, about an hour east of, about an hour inland of LA. Then I did a spine fellowship. This is advanced training in spine surgery during my 5th year of residency. That was a spine fellowship. And then after residency, I did an extra year brain tumor fellowship at Emory in Atlanta. And I'll also explain the reason for all the extra work there, but I'm sure some of you can already figure out exactly why I felt the need to do that. As you know, we always have to go above and beyond just to be given the same amount of credit. But just to piggyback on some of the things you mentioned, I mean, mentorship is very important. Unfortunately, it's not something we have a lot of. If anything, we have very little of, not just in medicine, not just in surgery, but especially in neurosurgery. I did have mentors. You really cannot make it through without mentors, but I cannot say that I truly had mentors that looked like me or had my same background or had the same cultural background, just enough to where you could really feel comfortable and put full trust in a mentor. It makes a world of difference when it's somebody who either looks like you or grew up the way you grew up and faced the same hurdles that you faced. And that is something that would have been nice. And it's a role that I hope I'm up to the challenge of being able to fulfill for others as I grow older in this profession. And it kind of ties back into what you mentioned in the beginning as well. Having the diversity does give a voice to the voiceless. And by that, I don't just mean voice to the voiceless as far as patients, but it also gives a voice to the voiceless as far as healthcare providers, not just physicians, but nurses, all kinds of staff in the hospital. I mean, it's a world of difference when somebody in cybersecurity in the hospital then sees, hey, they have a young Black guy as their neurosurgeon. Wow, this place is really forward thinking. So it really does raise everybody's morale. I mean, it's not tooting my own horn, but it's something I've learned. It is a big responsibility when you realize that there are a lot of eyes on you and a lot of people are proud of you and looking to you to pay it forward and keep carrying the torch and help others achieve what we have been deprived of for well, centuries and forever. And there have been challenges. There have been a lot of challenges along the way, and there are still challenges. Some challenges that you all are probably aware of and can probably figure out, but some really big challenges that most of society is not even aware of or is still in denial of, and things that make it difficult for people to break into not just medicine and surgery, but even neurosurgery. I mean, it's a world that it's hard to get into, and it's made harder based on skin color.
Wow. Very real talk, as we call that. And one of the things I know, especially looking at this panel, is that most of you are from ethnicities outside of the United States. And in the countries in which you were possibly born in, everyone is the same color or same ethnicity. So you're really only competing on your skills. Just so it's not on, you go to Haiti or you go to St. Kitts or you go to Jamaica and you've got surgery, you go into the hospital, you're going to see Black surgery. It's not a big thing, but yet you come to United States and we have, we have populations of people that have training, and it's a struggle. So I want to ask Marilyn Rousseau, who's in the tech industry and in healthcare, how do you combat biases in the tech industry?
Well, let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Marilyn Rousseau. I am a manager at Baptist Health, South Florida. I have been in the IT industry for about 32 years, and I know I'm dating myself. My background is primarily in database administration. However, along the way, I also became a professional coach because I was so much passionate about helping other women, especially women of color, really navigate through the challenges in IT and be able to reach their goals. So your question, Grant, is how is it that I motivate staff?
No, it was how do you combat biases in the tech industry?
It's very difficult. I'm not going to, make it sound easy, but I do think one way to do it is to keep open and honest communication. Encouraging open dialogue all year long is really the way to do it, because these are difficult conversations. And then there are conversations that no one really wants to have, but it's necessary in order to break down the barriers. Because, often when we see someone who looks different or maybe who speaks different, we have ideas, and we all have biases, that are preconceived. However, when we do allow ourselves to get to know that person, we often find out that we have more in common than we ever thought. Think about it. The last time you met someone, we start talking, before we know it, maybe our kids went to the same school, or maybe, our mom came from the same town. I mean, that's something that we find in common, and really more times than not, we have more in common than we ever think. So for me, I think really talking about these biases, being open about them, again, we all have them. It's not just a particular group, but having discussions and understanding what happens, when a certain comments are made, what it does to someone else. Being someone from Haiti, I moved here when I was a teenager. Often comments that I hear is people will meet me and they'll say to me, "Oh, you don't look Haitian." And usually my response is, "Well, what does Haitian look like?" And I know they're probably referring to perhaps what they've seen in the media, and perhaps they've never met a Haitian person, perhaps who happens to be in the technical field. So I understand that, but these are biases that come out, and people mean nothing wrong by them, but I usually use these as an opportunity to also educate people about, who I am, where I came from, and it takes, again, it takes really open and honest communication. And I think also, we need to have companies that really encourage the culture of inclusion. This is really so, so important that you have that culture. We talk about diversity. Yes, it's important to have diversity, but also inclusion, making diverse individuals feel like they belong. They're part of the team, that you can listen to their concerns, and their concerns matters. Their point of view matters. Just because it's not the same as yours doesn't mean it can be dismissed. So I think really being able to value the diversity that each employee brings in, and also for the employee themselves to own their individuality, because it's very, very difficult also sometimes, for us to lose ourselves, because we might find, yourself being the only perhaps ethnic person in a room, so it's also important for us to develop our self-worth, so that we can deal with these biases in a healthy way, rather than feeling offended or having any other negative response to these.
No, that was a great response. Thank you. I felt that. And what I'm really feeling, it's that psychological impact. And that's so important. And I want to ask Regine, what are the psychological safety that work and the role it plays in diversity and inclusion? How do you see this playing out?
So we've all mentioned, mentorship. We've all mentioned looking into who we are, where we're from, right? So we have a lot of different, as this panel as well, really diverse, right? We come from different regions. Some of us are around the same. What is psychological safety, right? It's really having a sense of belonging, right, into the organization, not just I am here, and understanding that also too, I'm able to voice myself, right? And not voice myself to lose myself, as Marilyn just mentioned earlier. How do we still be ourselves and not lose ourselves to get into formation with everyone else, right? Because that we see that happening a lot, because we feel like this is how we will be accepted and belong. But how do we see ourselves being accepted for who we truly are, right? The safety of expressing oneself, right? The safety of exchange of ideas, and that is not being blindsided or pushed to the side because it's not coming from the right person, the right voice. I don't fit the profile, right? And I mentioned earlier getting into technology, right? I've been in this since I was 12. So imagine 1990, even still now, women in STEM, the numbers are astounding, right? They're going less and less. But how was I able to continue on is because, one, I had that safety among my peers, right? That I was at school. I was welcome. One, my professors welcomed me as well. They thought it was a great thing to have a female amongst the male, right? The different, and he pushed me as well into doing things by myself. I was like, well, there's 3 people here. Why not me? But that also started with the formation of acceptance for myself as well, that I can stand and be me and still do what I need to do and not feel like I was being taken out of that. So having that safety, understanding that inclusion is truly inclusion, right? It is not just I'm just here expressing, speaking with my peers, understanding that, and then being in a space that I am safe. Right, I am here and I'm safe to remain and move along with that, because we see that even though we're coming, some people say we've made it. That's not it, right? We're here, but how do I continue to be here? Is there other elements being against me so that I don't succeed, right? First step of success is being in the room, right? I'm in the room, I'm here. Now, what other elements now is preventing me from staying here? Is it myself or my colleague or even above my colleague, right? And there's all of these aspects of tiers that people don't see. And if they don't feel that, then what's the point? So when you're looking in psychological aspect of who we are versus who we are, and understanding and standing on ground, and now interjecting that as well.
Now, great comments. It reminds me of being, if you were in the film industry and you've seen some successful actors, and because they're so successful in a particular role, they become typecast. And I think certain segments of our society have been typecast. They don't see you in that role. We talked earlier, we talked about, and I'm talking about a couple of days ago, that like if you were in a different country, you see a pilot, that pilot, if you're coming out of another country in the Caribbean and whatnot, the color of that pilot wouldn't even phase you. You expect to see all kinds of different ethnicities behind the wheel of that plane. But you come to the United States, it's almost like you expect, it's a typecast. You expect that pilot to be a Caucasian. You expect that doctor to come out who's going to take care of you to be Caucasian. If he doesn't come out and he's not Caucasian, you start to have a different way of looking at it because you have this typecasting going on. And I think that happens in the tech industry as well. They see you as a very good technical resource, but can he see you as the leader? Are you the owner, of this business and that type of thing? So I'd like to see Dr. Alexis, would you like to chime in on that? Is that something you want to talk about?
Definitely. I know that there's two things I want to add to that conversation. I think Dr. Adewami initially talked about the idea of a journey, right? So everyone is on a different journey, and your reference point differs based on how you're raised, and the journey that you've taken to get to that point. I think you mentioned the coming out to the Caribbean. I have a level of expectation that I will be successful from day one. That's just how we were raised. So from my perspective, when I think of diversity and inclusion within healthcare, my concern is about just moving the barriers, right? We're moving the barriers and allowing individuals to compete on merit. If you're qualified, you can do the job, try to do that. I think there's also a different perception of a healthcare leader. I think if we look at healthcare itself as an institution whereby there was multiple people that contribute to that success, right? It's just more than the white coat when you walk through the door. There's the individual who have to manage the infrastructure. I may not be a medical doctor, but if you're not concerned about how you're managing patient care and access and how that information is protected, your institution would fall. It doesn't matter how great your physicians are, how great your institutions are running, if you're not taking that step. And I think if we go back and look at that whole healthcare as an entire institution where multiple people can play that role that they bring, the whole discussion about bringing your authentic self. Okay, what is it that Marilyn is good at? What is it that Dare is good at, or Regine is good at? We don't always have to try to pigeonhole ourselves in terms of what the mold should be. And that goes back to the whole issue of mentorship and leadership, right? Because a lot of those initiatives have to be driven from the top. A lot of institutions may roll out a diversity initiative or roll out an inclusion initiative, but is it something that they're practicing every day? Is it reflected in how their hiring practices, how they socialize, their input in the community, and upward mobility from leadership? In some of the places I've seen before, you can actually see in the blatant disrespect sometimes, where no matter how hard you work, it's come to a point where you're going to run into that wall, right? So it's not about always your merit, because you can have the same skill, the same experience, and you come to the table and you still don't have a chair, right? You can either extend the table or you can either create a new table, right? And have a more diverse discussion within that whole institution. But in the long run, our goal as an institution is to increase better outcome for patients, right? And if the patients are not a part of that decision making, it's going to be a challenge for us, right? A recent research that I was looking at in New England Medical Journal of Medicine talk about the whole issue of pipelines and the disparities within the systems. An individual coming into those institutions, you're going to bring your own implicit biases. The concern is when those implicit biases affect outcome, where the decision in terms of your ability to treat a specific patient is now impacted by that bias that you're going to bring, right?
Oh my God. That's a drop the mic moment right there, because that's it, implicit bias. Sometimes you don't even realize those biases. And I want to talk to Dr. Adewami because he kind of referred to that. And it's about representation matters. And that we all need to be involved in this. We have a cultural change. There's a cultural change that has to take place in America. And a lot of that is about how we look at people just as human beings on an ongoing basis. So I like, because I know Dr. Adewami, you're living this. You're coming into this age, you've got great credentials, yet you have to start at a different rung every time. Can you give us some input on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a million thoughts going through my head because there's, I mean, so many stories I could tell. And the question is, do I tell the stories or do I tell, or do I, kind of hover and give kind of a broader overview based on time? But I mean, everything everybody just said is absolutely true. I mean, it's, circling back a little bit to what you said. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in more advanced professions do tend to be of, I guess, kind of an international background. I don't know exactly why that is, but my suspicion is we immigrants, in a sense, tend to face a little bit less racism because if you get here as a teenager, you've missed those first 14, 15 years of being called the N-word in elementary school. You've missed those years of people criticizing your hair, people using one word or another against you. And that does have an effect on children. And you get here and you just assume you're on the same playing field as everybody else because you've always been on the same playing field as everybody else. And so you just keep fighting. And you don't realize that racism exists until later, whereas some of our brothers and sisters who grew up here see that from age 3, 4, 5 years old. And some people do just give up and just say, well, I just don't stand a chance. There's also the fact of going back to that lack of mentorship, whereas we got to see mentors or we got to see people doing it who look like us, they did not get to see that. So it makes it harder to believe you can do it. I've had talks with kids in elementary schools and things like that and let them know, look, if I can do it, you can do it. And they have never seen a Black neurosurgeon. They've never seen a Black physician. Whereas a lot of us have seen Black physicians from our countries. I'm Nigerian. And so the first physician I saw was Black. So it didn't seem like an impossible thing to me. Whereas if you don't see a Black physician until you're 17 years old, it makes it much harder to then circle back and say, oh, okay, I guess this is what I want to do with my life. We kind of touched on the topic of, not representation, but access and how much it, I like that topic of a voice for the voiceless, because it's something that's really underestimated, and how access to healthcare really is limited because there are people who are capable, more than capable of doing these jobs, who are overqualified intellectually for these jobs and are not given the opportunities. There are roughly 350, 400 million people in this country, right? There are less than 100 Black female neurosurgeons. I'll say that again, 350 to 400 million people in this country. Less than 100 of those, I think the number is closer to 60 Black female neurosurgeons. And you hear the number and it kind of gives you an impact. I think males hover around 200 to 250 Black male neurosurgeons. Even that number is crazy. But when you hear about the female number, it gets even more crazy. And I don't think there's a single person out there who will not tell you that Black females are probably much better at this than most people who are doing this job. And another thing you have to look at is when you have a group of people who have to work so hard to get to where they are, their competence level is probably higher than everybody else who did not have to work nearly as hard. Just simply, put it much more simply. You mentioned a lot of times you see, your physician come out and you feel more comfortable. It's a white physician. But you see a Black physician, everybody gets a little nervous because you're not used to seeing that. If you see a white physician and you see a Black female physician, I run to the Black female physician because I know what she had to go through to get there. And I know this lady excuse my terminology, but this lady has to be a complete badass at what she does to get to where she is. And so I'm like, you know what, that is who I want taking care of me. So it kind of gives you, an idea that there are people out there who are really good at this and can do this and are not given the chance. And then when they are given the chance, when they do make it, there are too many roadblocks. There's too much systemic racism. There are too many avenues that are used to force them out because the higher ups don't want them there. There's an implicit jealousy. There's an implicit just hatred for people who look like, there's an implicit hatred for people of color. And when they do make it, there are severe systematic attempts to force them out. I'm speaking from personal experience and from experiences of my peers. This is not third-party hearsay. These are things that I have seen live, and I mean, it gets to be rough.
And I appreciate your candidacy, and I want to pivot over to.
Brett, can I say something?
Oh, you want to? Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just to back off of what the doctor just mentioned, it's really, it's across industries. In healthcare, it's very poignant, right? So a part of that is the identity, right? The identity crisis and then the imposter syndrome, because all of these are some of those elements that now once you get in, do I really belong? And you start doing the imposter syndrome. But also too, the questioning of how did you get here, right? And how did you get this gig? How did you get to go here? Like, this is such a high level of process. How did you get here? And you're like, start thinking, well, how did I get here? Do I belong here? Like, that process. So you start losing some of your identity. And it is different when you come from the island, because success there's no way about it. That's all we know, right? Education is all we'll know. And then now we have to look into all of these. And I know, speaking from experience, I've always been told I had a great idea, right? Stemming for how I started my business. Yeah, you have a great idea. Awesome. Great. So why are you not participating in my great idea? Because everyone keeps sending me to you. Eventually, you have to believe in yourself and you have to make that jump, right? And then so you understand you belong in that room. And how do you belong in that room? I only know one way to do it. Create it, right? And Alexis mentioned, if you're at the table, is there a chair for you? Do you bring your own chair? Do you extend the table? I'll bring my own chair, right? And then I'm gonna sit here, right? Because part of it, you're in conversation, you invited, and everyone else is speaking until the person that everyone is speaking about say, so what are you here for? I said, why doesn't he let him introduce me then? Because he invited me here. And at the end of the introduction, well, why isn't she speaking? Why is everyone, this is the person I need to talk to. So why all of you started speaking? So there's validation that needs to take place, right? So how do you bypass all that and move away from all of these things that you're dealing with? So, experience as well, right? So yes, you get in as much tenacity that you have, because you can't go back home and say, I didn't say a word because I was afraid, right? You don't have that option. There's none of that. So the mindset is a big mindset shift that needs to take place in identity and eliminate that imposter syndrome. And we don't realize we're not the only one who suffers from it, right? But it's just how daring can we be?
Well, it's visible, unfortunately, for especially speaking of my experience being an African American going through civil rights in this country. We are the poster child of civil rights, human rights. It's just that way. That's our calling. Well, you have to keep working through it and then understanding. I appreciate having my people from the Caribbean, people from the continent of Africa speaking about how the psychological framework is so different. I had a gentleman that used to work at here in South Florida and born in Kenya. And he said he had to come to America to realize he was Black. That should say something. That should say something. He had to come here to realize he was Black, because everybody, you just don't, that's not the issue. They're talking about more, don't say there's not problems, there's tribal issues, there's other things that make people different, but that's not one of them. And these are the things I think for me, as I look at it as our American creed and what we're about, We have to stand up for all people, but we've got to live it. We've got to live it. I want to pivot over to Marilyn because we've got a question in the chat and I like to direct it to her. And this is from an African-American female. She says, what advice would you give to new graduates without mentors or connections in the industry to get connected? I am loaded with a clinical foundation and I have not been successful with securing a foothold in the entry level, as a entry level position.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can definitely identify because I have never had the luxury of having a mentor in my entire IT career, which spans 30 plus years. And I can tell you it was very difficult, you know, especially when you're the only person who looks different and you're trying to really navigate your way, and you tend to even lose your identity along the way because you're so eager to please and be accepted. So looking back, the advice that I would give is to, you know, find someone who can help you, a mentor. And I know they're out there, you know, it's not the same as it was 30 something years ago. You know, nowadays you can go online, there are user groups that you can join. There are meetup groups that you can join. You know, I would say find a way to get connected with other people who are like-minded, even on Facebook groups, you know, and that way you'll be able to make connections and hopefully make connections with, you know, seasoned professionals who can help you, who are really, you know, there and they want to help you get successful. That would be my advice. And I don't just say it, that's something that I'm really involved in doing. You know, I go on these Facebook groups, I take questions, I answer because I don't want someone else to go through what I had to go through in order to navigate myself and reach my career goals. You know, I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and it's great to pass them on to somebody else who's up and coming. So my advice is to really, you know, look for a mentor, sometimes a sponsor. And if you don't know anyone, you know, join groups, in local groups, online groups, and you'll be able to have access to a lot more, you know, knowledge and support along the way.
Wonderful. And just so everyone listening will know that there is a mentor-mentee program that is going to be beginning in South Florida HIMSS. This is wonderful. This is something that's been missing. You know, this is a reach out program. More information will come out. We're going to, you know, just get in touch with us. But we want to start pairing people, I say people, together that, you know, has aspirations. I have my own, you know, I've been part of the National Association of Health Service Executives. That's for Black Health Service Executives, to get mentorship, to get access, to understand what the capabilities and the skill sets that are necessary. But the number one thing that you need in this industry is relationships. You've got to have the relationships. If you don't have the relationships, if people don't know you or they don't know how to approach you and to talk to you at a real level, it becomes difficult. I've talked to a lot of C-level executives, whether they were women, they were different ethnicities, and they said, what happened? There was a reach out. And sometimes this person is from a completely different culture, but they believed in that person. That's an advocacy. So you've got to have that.
Yeah, that is definitely true, Grant. Because like you said, one of the things that successful people have in common is that they like to share their journey, right? Most people love to have that conversation about how I did it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, for the individual who asks that question, if you start looking at successful people within a field, whether it's healthcare, you know, look at the top 10 or top 100 people who's in that field, find out how they did it. And if you go through and do a little bit of research, you'll be able to see that there was a documented process, right? And, you know, the worst thing that you can do is reach out to someone and they say no, right? But like, you know, most people always talk about if you don't take the first shot, you're always going to miss everyone that you don't take. So the worst thing they can do is just say no. But then what you need to do is find somebody else who have done it. The way the business is today, there's individuals have a lot more access to data. There's a lot of research you can do. There's a lot of community organization. You talk about NAZI, and there's many institutions that's established to be able to help you get to that journey. and just find a way to connect.
Agree 100%. You know, I think that's the way to go, and be willing, you know, to go out there, put yourself out there. Because really, when we think back, or when I think back, the majority of the opportunities that I've had in the technology field have been through who I know, you know, and it's so much easier when you know you have a network that you can tap into, so that when you're looking for help with something, you can reach out. But, you know, staying isolated definitely is not going to help you get ahead. So that was a good point, Dr. Alexis.
Yep, and we've got a few minutes remaining. And so I'm just opening up the floor before we wrap up for the day. First of all, I'm going to say this: I'm very proud of every single one of you to come on as a panelist, to speak to a topic that sometimes, as you said earlier, is difficult to talk about. But I think we've grown up a little bit more. We've matured as a people, that we have to have these conversations. I do not want my kids to have these conversations. One thing I learned, I thought after civil rights in the 60s and 70s, that, you know, racism as overt racism was over. And I wasn't really concerned about it as much. And then I talked to a millennial, and we had these conversations, and some things are going on in the community that were, you know, really putting a lot of light on it. And she was telling me that, you know, racism is a lot worse than it is today than it was then, because it's covert. You know, before then, we were fighting just to use this water fountain or to sit at a counter. That was very, very visible. And it's concerning, because we've had on the books around just human resources that you can't be biased somebody, whether they're race, creed, religion, sex, for 50 years, 60 years. Why are we having this conversation now? You know, I think that that's something that we have to look at ourselves as individuals and truly think about that. Because are we in our own silos? Are we only cherry picking from people that we're comfortable with, and we're not comfortable having conversations with people outside of those walls? So before we leave, I just wanted to open that up, and then we'll move on. And again, I want to thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Grant, I just want to make a comment. You know, I've always, you know, people would ask, you know, how do you do what you do, right? So how do I don't know anything else to do. I don't know anyone else to be, right? Except for myself and how I was brought up and the things that I've know that I have to create for myself, right? So there's one thing that not to forget to be able to create things for yourself as well. Create the opportunity, because we don't wait for the opportunity, right, to come to you, because that time it doesn't. And you know, when leaving high school, everyone's like, so what are you gonna do now? I said, well, there's statistics, right? If we look at it, there's statistics. We can't go without it, right? It's been around before our time. It's gonna continue to be there, right? That's how decisions are made. A lot of things are done. But I always said there's a positive and there's a negative, right? There's a track. So I always choose to be in the positive side of the track and the statistics, instead of remaining in the negative, right? Or be in the negative, because it doesn't really take me anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I say, and as you go along, we are where we are because we belong where we are. There's steps, there's a journey. We've all talked about that. Sometimes we may not, because we leave at the top, we may not start our journey at the top. We have to learn how to maneuver through it as well, right? Because then we have to work with that identity in ourselves. But I learned to use your differences as a positive. And if we start doing that, it shifts. The shift starts, right? Learn to do that, because there's the negative will always be there, but how do we use our differences as positive and start making an impact? And we mentor, we do all of that, but as ourselves within our colleague and what we're trying to achieve as well, look at that as a positive, because it's always good when you're the person in the room, right? But when you say something, what's the meaning? What's the weight does it have? Because everyone will turn around and say, hey, let me listen to that person. Hidden Figures opened the eyes of a lot of young women in this community, things we didn't know. Imagine that, huh? The voice, there's only one voice that astronaut trusted, and that was the African-American female. that no one allowed to speak until she took that step and said, whatever's going to happen, I'm going to take it, but I won't let that, I cannot not say something or do something. So she chose to be in the positive instead of remaining in the negative as just a figure. So that's what I always say. That's how I think. I have a 9-year-old. That's what I tell them as well. And kids, use your difference as a positive, because that's what's going to start the conversation or continue having impact.
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I love what you saying, Regine. Also, we have to recognize that it can be easier said than done. You know, not every child has that self-confidence, high self-esteem to feel that way. And I think it's our responsibility, you know, to pay it forward and to help develop that sense of confidence, you know, that sense of, yes, I can do this, so that they can pursue, you know, successful careers. And I'm so passionate about this, because I understand, you know, we talk about coming from other countries, other cultures, you know, growing up in Haiti. In my household, education was huge. You know, my father was a Supreme Court judge, my mom was a teacher. So I had the benefit of learning to value education. But we also know, especially in underserved communities, that's not always the case. So how do we rescue these children? Because I believe everybody has greatness within them. So how do we rescue, you know, other young girls, young boys who may not have had this positive environment and still inspire them to do and to be all that they were created to be? So I think that's really a big area that, you know, us perhaps as more seasoned professionals can really think about how we can support that.
And we can keep going on, and
Awesome.
we all need to, as we continue to move forward and set a path for our early careers, to our mid careers, to our students and our children as we go through this journey together. So thank you all. Oh, do you want to say something, Alexis?
Yeah, Grant. I think one of the things that we have to look at as a society is the whole issue around that pipeline, right?
Yep.
You need to start a lot earlier. I think Dr. Adewami talked about that initially, where you need to be able to hit those kids earlier to get them that interest within healthcare or any industry, right? Get them early exposure to individuals who've done it, what is a process, help them change that perception, right? Because there's a, you know, one of the benefit of this great country is also one of our challenges, right? There's a perception of help, and that interpretation of one process of helping someone is another scapegoat for someone else, right? The help is not seen equally, because so a process that may help me, maybe look at a handout, as opposed to a process that may be helping another type of individuals, maybe looking at the help up or retooling or reskilling. So when you look at that whole idea on the perception of that help to get individuals started, not everybody see the same, right? Many people talk about the change, but not many organizations are implementing it and having that leadership support from the top.
No, and exactly. And it is a group effort. You can't do it by yourself, but we all have to move forward and understand our own typecast, how we're typecasting people. One thing I always loved about South Florida personally is that you could never really walk up to another individual and just know their ethnicity. They could be from anywhere. You know, just because you see someone that is of light skin doesn't mean he's of American descent. He could be from Europe. He could be from Australia. He could be Cuban. Anything. Just because a person is of a certain hue doesn't mean he's African American experience. He has a Caribbean experience. He has a Nigerian experience. He has all kinds of other things. So you cannot put people into these boxes and expect them to adhere to it. You have to wake up and accept the whole person and allow that person to define themselves before you start putting definitions upon them. So I want to thank everyone for your participation today. We're going to wrap up now, and I need everyone to tune in tomorrow. We're going to pick up tomorrow afternoon about 1 o'clock. We're going to start it off with Hal Wolf. He's going to be he's the national president and CEO of HIMSS. He's going to welcome everybody in. We're going to have a keynote speaker talking about the acceleration and adoption of digital health innovation. As Kristen Melaster. We're going to have Dan Rucker. He's the former national coordinator of the ONC. He's going to be speaking about new age APIs in healthcare. Then we have David Wilcox. If anybody saw my podcast released today, this is wonderful. And he's going to talk about the truth is in the data, a pulse check on the American healthcare system, how not to be a victim. This is very, very important for a lot of people that have not engaged with the healthcare system. And then we're going to hear from Mickey Tripathi. He's, on the ONC. He's the chair at this particular point. He's going to talk about the federal health IT updates and what it means for Floridians. And then we're going to hear from the FBI. So Denise Steeman, she is going to talk about cybersecurity, the challenges associated with remote health informatics workers, which is big. And then we're going to conclude, because this is a celebration. Okay, this is our 10-year anniversary being here with HIMSS. We're going to have all the past presidents, most of them, to be able to speak to everyone, to really talk about their experience. And we're, I don't want to say goodbye to everybody now. So that's tomorrow, but tune in, make sure you're set. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your patience as we work through some of the technical challenges. We're giving Zoom some good feedback so they know how to work with the platform going forward. But I appreciate them allowing us to do this. It definitely helped us tremendously. So with that said, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.